Coming at you live from the beautiful heartland of these good old United States of America, right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. This is the Rant. I'm your host, Charles Lamson. I'll be with you for the next 2 hours. The YouTube God's willing. Okay, so today is Monday, 14th day of October, year of our Lord 2019. Today's topic, part 3 of, part 3. It's been a while, okay, of public relations and economic perspective, part 3. Okay, that's right. So in this episode, I'm going to be like most episodes, the first half, I'm going to have a little seance here. I'm going to channel the spirit of Alfred Marshall. And he's going to come from beyond the grave and talk to us about his principles of economics. And then we're going to have a special feature in today's show where we're going to have a special guest spirit from beyond the grave who's going to be weighing in. And so you won't want to miss a single second of that. This guy just recently entered the spirit realm. Or it's about to, I don't know. But the spirits aren't really aren't giving me a clear answer. But anyway, so you want to stay tuned for that special guest spirit as well. That will be he'll be showing up in the seance, first half of the show, and then the second half of the show we're going to close the seance and send both of those spirits back to economist hell where they belong. I'm just joking. I don't know if they're going to go to hell or not, but or where they go, but they can't stay here. So we do a little banishing ritual to cleanse the house of spiritual entities. And then second half of the big show, we're going to be talking about public relations and how it relates to economics, how we can apply these principles of economics by Alfred Marshall, and also our special guest spirit as well. He's a brilliant, I guess he's more in the world of finance than economics, but you'll see. I'm going to leave that as a teaser. So, while we do that, the first half, I'm going to be, as always, going to be doing my motivational, inspirational, 50-year-old crippled guy instructional fitness video. And once again, I'm just going to be using really lightweight 10-pound therapeutic bar and just trying to keep it moving, get a good stretch. And 45, 50 minutes. Like to take little, without further ado, I've talked enough. This little intro is long enough. So, okay, Alfred, are you there? Please come to us from your spiritual abode. Share with us your principles of economics, please. We need help. We need your guidance.
It fluctuates rapidly from year to year. Rigid money standards cannot work out truly. It is difficult, if not impossible, to give them appropriate elasticity. And that is a reason against extreme applications of the common rule, which must perforce use so rigid and imperfect an implement. The urgency of this consideration is increased by the natural tendency of trade unions to press for a rise in standard money wages during inflations of credit, which raise prices and lower the purchasing power of money for the time. At that time, employers may be willing to pay high wages, measured in real purchasing power, and still higher wages in terms of money, even for labour that falls somewhat short of the standard of full normal efficiency. Thus, men of but second-rate efficiency earn the high standard money wages and make good their claim to be admitted as members of the union. But very soon the inflation of credit subsides and is followed by a depression. Prices fall, and the purchasing power of money rises. The real value of labour falls, and its money value falls faster. The high standard of money wages, attained during the inflation, is now too high to leave a good margin of profits, even on the work of fully efficient men. And those who are below the standard of efficiency are not worth the standard wages. This false standardization is not an unmixed evil to the efficient members of the trade, for it tends to make their labour more in demand, just as does the compulsory idleness of elderly men. But it does so only by checking production, and therefore checking the demand for the labour of other branches of industry. The more such a policy is persisted in by trade unions generally, the deeper and more sustained is the injury caused to the national dividend, and the less is the aggregate of employment at good wages throughout the country. In the long run, every branch of industry would prosper better if each exerted itself more strenuously to set up several standards of efficiency for labour, with corresponding standards for wages, and were more quick to consent to some relaxation of a high standard of money wages when the crest of a wave of high prices to which it was adapted had passed away. Such adjustments are full of difficulty, but progress towards them might be hastened if there were a more general and clear appreciation of the fact that high wages, gained by means that hinder production in any branch of industry, necessarily increase unemployment in other branches. For indeed, the only effective remedy for unemployment is a continuous adjustment of means to ends, in such way that credit can be based on the solid foundation of fairly accurate forecasts, and that reckless inflations of credit, the chief cause of all economic malaise, may be kept within narrower limits. This matter cannot be argued here, but a few words may be said in further explanation. Mill well observed that what constitutes the means of payment for commodities is simply commodities. Each person's means of paying for the production of other people consist of those which he himself possesses. All sellers are inevitably, and by the meaning of the word, buyers. Could we suddenly double the productive powers of the country, we should double the supply of commodities in every market, but we should, by the same stroke, double the purchasing power. Everybody would bring a double demand as well as supply. Everybody would be able to buy twice as much, because everyone would have twice as much to offer in exchange. But though men have the power to purchase, they may not choose to use it. For when confidence has been shaken by failures, capital cannot be got to start new companies or extend old ones. Projects for new railways meet with no favour. Ships lie idle, and there are no orders for new ships. There is scarcely any demand for the work of navvies, and not much for the work of the building and the engine-making trades. In short, there is but little occupation in any of the trades which make fixed capital. Those whose skill and capital is specialized in these trades are earning little, and therefore buying little of the produce of other trades. Other trades, finding a poor market for their goods, produce less. They earn less, and therefore they buy less. The diminution of the demand for their wares makes them demand less of other trades. Thus, commercial disorganization spreads. The disorganization of one trade throws others out of gear, and they react on it and increase its disorganization. The chief cause of the evil is a want of confidence. The greater part of it could be removed almost in an instant if confidence could return, touch all industries with her magic wand, and make them continue their production and their demand for the wares of others. If all trades which make goods for direct consumption agreed to work on, and to buy each other's goods as in ordinary times, they would supply one another with the means of earning a moderate rate of profits and of wages. The trades which make fixed capital might have to wait a little longer, but they too would get employment when confidence had revived so far that those who had capital to invest had made up their minds how to invest it. Confidence, by growing, would cause itself to grow. Credit would give increased means of purchase, and thus prices would recover. Those in trade already would make good profits. New companies would be started, old businesses would be extended, and soon there would be a good demand even for the work of those who make fixed capital. There is, of course, no formal agreement between the different trades to begin again to work full-time, and so make a market for each other's wares. But the revival of industry comes about through the gradual and often simultaneous growth of confidence among many various trades. It begins as soon as traders think that prices will not continue to fall, and with a revival of industry, prices rise. Footnote. The quotation from Mill and the 2 paragraphs which follow it are reproduced from the Economics of Industry, published by my wife and myself in 1879. They indicate the attitude which most of those who follow in the traditions of the classical economists hold as to the relations between consumption and production. It is true that in times of depression, the disorganization of consumption is a contributory cause to the continuance of the disorganization of credit and of production. But a remedy is not to be got by a study of consumption, as has been alleged by some hasty writers. No doubt there is good work to be done by a study of the influence of arbitrary changes in fashion on employment. But the main study needed is that of the organization of production and of credit. And though economists have not yet succeeded in bringing that study to a successful issue, the cause of their failure lies in the profound obscurity and ever-changing form of the problem. It does not lie in any indifference on their part to its supreme importance. Economics, from beginning to end, is a study of the mutual adjustments of consumption and production. When the one is under discussion, the other is never out of mind. End of footnote. Section 11. The main drift of this study of distribution, then, suggests that the social and economic forces already at work are changing the distribution of wealth for the better, that they are persistent and increasing in strength, and that their influence is for the greater part cumulative, that the socio-economic organism is more delicate and complex than at first sight appears, and that large, ill-considered changes might result in grave disaster. In particular, it suggests that the assumption and ownership by government of all the means of production, even if brought about gradually and slowly, as the more responsible collectivists propose, might cut deeper into the roots of social prosperity than appears at first sight. Starting from the fact that the growth of the national dividend depends on the continued progress of invention and the accumulation of expensive appliances for production, we are bound to reflect that up to the present time, nearly all of the innumerable inventions that have given us our command over nature have been made by independent workers, and that the contributions from government officials all the world over have been relatively small. Further, nearly all the costly appliances for production, which are now in collective ownership by national or local governments, have been bought with resources borrowed mainly from the savings of businessmen and other private individuals. Oligarchic governments have sometimes made great efforts to accumulate collective wealth, and it may be hoped that in the coming time, foresight and patience will become the common property of the main body of the working classes. But as things are, too great a risk would be involved by entrusting to a pure democracy the accumulation of the resources needed for acquiring yet further command over nature. There is, therefore, strong prima facie cause for fearing that the collective ownership of the means of production would deaden the energies of mankind and arrest economic progress, unless, before its introduction, the whole people had acquired a power of unselfish devotion to the public good, which is now relatively rare. And though this matter cannot be entered upon here, it might probably destroy much that is most beautiful and joyful in the private and domestic relations of life. These are the main reasons which cause patient students of economics generally to anticipate little good and much evil from schemes for sudden and violent reorganization of the economic, social, and political conditions of life. Further, we are bound to reflect that the distribution of the national dividend, though bad, is not nearly as bad as is commonly supposed. In fact, there are many artisan households in England, and even more in the United States, in spite of the colossal fortunes that are found there, which would lose by an equal distribution of the national income. Therefore, the fortunes of the masses of the people, though they would of course be greatly improved for the time by the removal of all inequalities, would not be raised, even temporarily, at all near to the level which is assigned to them in socialistic anticipation of a golden age. Footnote. Some years ago, the annual income of some 49 million people in the United Kingdom appeared to amount to more than £2 billion. Many leading artisans were earning about £200 a year, and there were a vast number of artisan households in which each of 4 or 5 members were earning an income ranging from 18 shillings to 40 shillings a week. The expenditure of these households was on as large, if not a larger scale, than would be possible if the total income were divided out equally, so as to yield about £40 annually a head. No recent statistics are accessible on the matter, but it seems certain that the incomes of the working classes generally are increasing at least as fast as those of other classes. Several of the suggestions made in the present chapter are further developed in an article on the social possibilities of economic chivalry in the Economic Journal for March 1907. End of footnote. But this cautious attitude does not imply acquiescence in the present inequalities of wealth. The drift of economic science during many generations has been with increasing force towards the belief that there is no real necessity, and therefore no moral justification, for extreme poverty side by side with great wealth. The inequalities of wealth, though less than they are often represented to be, are a serious flaw in our economic organization. Any diminution of them which can be attained by means that would not sap the springs of free initiative and strength of character, and would not therefore materially check the growth of the national dividend, would seem to be a clear social gain. Though arithmetic warns us that it is impossible to raise all earnings beyond the level already reached by specially well-to-do artisan families, it is certainly desirable that those who are below that level should be raised, even at the expense of lowering in some degree those who are above it. Section 12. Prompt action is needed in regard to the large, though it may be hoped now steadily diminishing, residuum of persons who are physically, mentally, or morally incapable of doing a good day's work with which to earn a good day's wage. This class perhaps includes some others besides those who are absolutely unemployable, but it is a class that needs exceptional treatment. The system of economic freedom is probably the best from both a moral and material point of view for those who are in fairly good health of mind and body. But the residuum cannot turn it to good account, and if they are allowed to bring up children in their own pattern, then Anglo-Saxon freedom must work badly through them on the coming generation. It would be better for them, and much better for the nation, that they should come under a paternal discipline, something like that which prevails in Germany. Footnote. A beginning might be made with a broader, more educative, and more generous administration of public aid to the helpless. The difficulty of discrimination would need to be faced, and in facing it, local and central authorities would obtain much of the information needed for guiding, and in extreme cases for controlling those who are weak, and especially those whose weakness is a source of grave danger to the coming generation. Elderly people might be helped with a chief regard to economy and to their personal inclinations. But the case of those who are responsible for young children would call for a greater expenditure of public funds and a more strict subordination of personal freedom to public necessity. The most urgent among the first steps towards causing the residuum to cease from the land is to insist on regular school attendance in decent clothing and with bodies clean and fairly well fed. In case of failure, the parents should be warned and advised. As a last resource, the homes might be closed or regulated with some limitation of the freedom of the parents. The expense would be great, but there is no other so urgent need for bold expenditure. It would remove the great canker that infects the whole body of the nation, and when the work was done, the resources that had been absorbed by it would be free for some more pleasant but less pressing social duty. End of footnote. The evil to be dealt with is so urgent that strong measures against it are eagerly to be desired, and the proposal that a minimum wage should be fixed by authority of government below which no man may work, and another below which no woman may work, has claimed the attention of students for a long while. If it could be made effective, its benefits would be so great that it might be gladly accepted, in spite of the fear that it would lead to malingering and some other abuses, and that it would be used as a leverage for pressing for a rigid, artificial standard of wages, in cases in which there was no exceptional justification for it. But though great improvements in the details of the scheme have been made recently, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years, its central difficulties do not appear to have been fairly faced. There is scarcely any experience to guide us except that of Australasia, where every inhabitant is part owner of a vast landed property, and which has been recently peopled by men and women in full strength and health. And such experience is of but little use in regard to a people whose vitality has been impaired by the old poor law and the old corn laws, and by the misuses of the factory system, when its dangers were not yet understood. A scheme that has any claim to be ready for practical adoption must be based on statistical estimates of the numbers of those who under it would be forced to seek the aid of the state, because their work was not worth the minimum wage, with special reference to the question of how many of these might have supported life fairly well if it had been possible to work with nature, and to adjust in many cases the minimum wage to the family instead of to the individual. Footnote. This last consideration seems to have been pushed on one side, largely under the influence of a faulty analysis of the nature of parasitic work and of its influence on wages. The family is, in the main, a single unit as regards geographical migration, and therefore the wages of men are relatively high, and those of women and children low, where heavy iron or other industries preponderate, while in some other districts less than half the money income of the family is earned by the father, and men's wages are relatively low. This natural adjustment is socially beneficial, and rigid national rules as to minimum wages for men and for women, which ignore or oppose it, are to be deprecated. End of footnote. Section 13. Turning then to those workers who have fairly good moral and physical stamina, it may be estimated roughly that those who are capable only of rather unskilled work constitute about 1/4 of the population, and those who, though fit for the lower kinds of skilled work, are neither fit for highly skilled work, nor able to act wisely and promptly in responsible positions, constitute about another 1/4. If similar estimates had been made in England a century ago, the proportions would have been very different. More than half would have been found unfit for any skilled labour at all beyond the ordinary routine of agriculture, and perhaps less than 1/6 part would have been fit for highly skilled or responsible work. For the education of the people was not then recognised as a national duty and a national economy. If this had been the only change, the urgent demand for unskilled labour would have compelled employers to pay for it nearly the same wage as for skilled. The wages for skilled labour would have fallen a little, and those for unskilled would have risen, until the two had nearly met. Even as it is, something like this has happened. The wages of unskilled labour have risen faster than those of any other class, faster even than those of skilled labour. And this movement towards the equalization of earnings would have gone much faster had not the work of purely unskilled labour been meanwhile annexed by automatic and other machinery faster even than that of skilled labour, so that there is less wholly unskilled work to be done now than formerly. It is true that some kinds of work, which traditionally belonged to skilled artisans, require now less skill than formerly. But on the other hand, the so-called unskilled labourer has now often to handle appliances too subtle and expensive to have been safely entrusted to the ordinary English labourer a century ago, or to any people at all in some backward countries now. Thus, mechanical progress is a chief cause of the great differences that still exist between the earnings of different kinds of labour, and this may seem at first a severe indictment, but it is not. If mechanical progress had been much slower, the real wages of unskilled labour would have been lower than they are now, not higher, for the growth of the national dividend would have been so much checked that even the skilled workers would generally have had to content themselves with less real purchasing power for an hour's work than the sixpence of the London bricklayer's labourer. And the unskilled labourer's wages would of course have been lower still. It has been assumed that the happiness of life, insofar as it depends on material conditions, may be said to begin when the income is sufficient to yield the barest necessities of life, and that after that has been attained, an increase by a given percentage of the income will increase that happiness by about the same amount, whatever the income be. This rough hypothesis leads to the conclusion that an increase by, say, a quarter of the wages of the poorer class of bona fide workers adds more to the sum total of happiness than an increase by a quarter of the incomes of an equal number of any other class. And that seems reasonable, for it arrests positive suffering and active causes of degradation, and it opens the way to hope as no other proportionate increase of incomes does. From this point of view, it may be urged that the poorer classes have derived a greater real benefit from economic progress on its mechanical and other sides than is suggested by the statistics of their wages. But all the more is it the duty of its society to endeavour to carry yet further an increase of well-being which is to be obtained at so low a cost. We have then to strive to keep mechanical progress in full swing, and to diminish the supply of labour incapable of any but unskilled work, in order that the average income of the country may rise faster even than in the past, and the share of it got by each unskilled labourer may rise faster still. To that end, we need to move in the same direction as in recent years, but more strenuously. Education must be made more thorough. The schoolmaster must learn that his main duty is not to impart knowledge, for a few shillings will buy more printed knowledge than a man's brain can hold. It is to educate character, faculties, and activities, so that children, even of those parents who are not thoughtful themselves, may have a better chance of being trained up to become thoughtful parents of the next generation. To this end, public money must flow freely, and it must flow freely to provide fresh air and space for wholesome play for the children in all working-class quarters. Footnote: it is urged below that the health of the working classes, and especially of their children, has a first claim on rates levied on that special value of urban land, which is caused by the concentration of population. End of footnote. Thus, the state seems to be required to contribute generously and even lavishly to that side of the well-being of the poorer working class which they cannot easily provide for themselves, and at the same time to insist that the inside of the houses be kept clean and fit for those who will be needed in after years to act as strong and responsible citizens. The compulsory standard of cubic feet of air per head needs to be raised steadily, though not violently, and this, combined with a regulation that no row of high buildings be erected without adequate free space in front and behind, will hasten the movement, already in progress, of the working classes from the central districts of large towns to places in which freer playroom is possible. Meanwhile, public aid and control in medical sanitary matters will work in another direction to lessen the weight that has hitherto pressed on the children of the poorer classes. The children of unskilled workers need to be made capable of earning the wages of skilled work, and the children of skilled workers need by similar means to be made capable of doing still more responsible work. They will not gain much, they are indeed more likely to lose, by pushing themselves into the ranks of the lower middle class, for, as has already been observed, the mere power of writing and keeping accounts belongs really to a lower grade than skilled manual work, and has ranked above it in past times, merely because proper education had been neglected. There is often a social loss as well as a social gain when the children of any grade press into the grade above them. But the existence of our present lowest class is an almost unmixed evil. Nothing should be done to promote the increase of its numbers, and children once born into it should be helped to rise out of it. There is plenty of room in the upper ranks of the artisans, and there is abundant room for newcomers in the upper ranks of the middle class. It is to the activity and resource of the leading minds in this class that most of those inventions and improvements are due, which enable the working man of today to have comforts and luxuries that were rare or unknown among the richest of a few generations ago, and without which, indeed, England could not supply her present population with a sufficiency even of common food. And it is a vast and wholly unmixed gain when the children of any class press within the relatively small charmed circle of those who create new ideas, and who embody those new ideas in solid constructions. Their profits are sometimes large, but taking one with another, they have probably earned for the world 100 times or more as much as they have earned for themselves. It is true that many of the largest fortunes are to be made by speculation rather than by truly constructive work, and much of this speculation is associated with antisocial strategy and even with evil manipulation of the sources from which ordinary investors derive their guidance. A remedy is not easy, and may never be perfect. Hasty attempts to control speculation by simple enactments have invariably proved either futile or mischievous, but this is one of those matters in which the rapidly increasing force of economic studies may be expected to render great service to the world in the course of this century. In many other ways, evil may be lessened by a wider understanding of the social possibilities of economic chivalry. A devotion to public well-being on the part of the rich may do much, as enlightenment spreads, to help the tax gatherer in turning the resources of the rich to high account in the service of the poor, and may remove the worst evils of poverty from the land. Section 14. The inequalities of wealth, and especially the very low earnings of the poorest classes, have just been discussed with reference to their effects in dwarfing activities as well as in curtailing the satisfaction of wants. But here, as everywhere, the economist brought up against the fact that the power of rightly using such income and opportunities as a family has is in itself wealth of the highest order, and of a kind that is rare in all classes. Perhaps £100 million annually are spent even by the working classes, and £400 million by the rest of the population of England, in ways that do little or nothing towards making life nobler or truly happier. And though it is true that a shortening of the hours of labour would in many cases lessen the national dividend and lower wages, yet it would probably be well that most people should work rather less, provided that the consequent loss of material income could be met exclusively by the abandonment by all classes of the least worthy methods of consumption, and that they could learn to spend leisure well. But unfortunately, human nature improves slowly, and in nothing more slowly than in the hard task of learning to use leisure well. In every age, in every nation, and in every rank of society, those who have known how to work well have been far more numerous than those who have known how to use leisure well. But on the other hand, it is only through freedom to use leisure as they will that people can learn to use leisure well. And no class of manual workers who are devoid of leisure can have much self-respect and become full citizens. Some time free from the fatigue of work that tires without educating is a necessary condition of a high standard of life. In this, as in all similar cases, it is the young whose faculties and activities are of the highest importance, both to the moralist and the economist. The most imperative duty of this generation is to provide for the young such opportunities as will both develop their higher nature and make them efficient producers. And an essential condition to this end is long-continued freedom from mechanical toil, together with abundant leisure for school and for such kinds of play as strengthen and develop the character. Even if we took account only of the injury done to the young by living in a home in which the father and the mother lead joyless lives, it would be in the interest of society to afford some relief to them also. Able workers and good citizens are not likely to come from homes from which the mother is absent during a great part of the day, nor from homes to which the father seldom returns till his children are asleep, and therefore society as a whole has a direct interest in the curtailment of extravagantly long hours of duty away from home, even for mineral train guards and others whose work is not in itself very hard. Section 15. In discussing the difficulty of adjusting the supply of industrial skill of various kinds to the demand for it, attention was called to the fact that the adjustment could not be nearly accurate, because the methods of industry change rapidly, and the skill of a worker needs to be used for some 40 or even 50 years after he has set himself to acquire it. The difficulties which we have just discussed turn largely on the long life of inherited habits and tones of thought and feeling. If the organization of our joint stock companies, of our railways or our canals is bad, we can set it right in a decade or two. But those elements of human nature which have been developed during centuries of war and violence, and of sordid and gross pleasures, cannot be greatly changed in the course of a single generation. Now, as always, noble and eager schemers for the reorganization of society have painted beautiful pictures of life, as it might be under institutions which their imagination constructs easily. But it is an irresponsible imagination, in that it proceeds on the suppressed assumption that human nature will, under the new institutions, quickly undergo changes such as cannot reasonably be expected in the course of a century, even under favorable conditions. If human nature could be thus ideally transformed, economic chivalry would dominate life, even under the existing institutions of private property. And private property, the necessity for which doubtless reaches no deeper than the qualities of human nature, would become harmless at the same time that it becomes unnecessary. There is then no need to guard against the temptation to overstate the economic evils of our own age, and to ignore the existence of similar and worse evils in earlier ages, even though some exaggeration may for the time stimulate others, as well as ourselves, to a more intense resolve that the present evils shall no longer be allowed to exist. But it is not less wrong, and generally it is much more foolish, to palter with truth for a good than for a selfish cause. And the pessimist descriptions of our own age, combined with romantic exaggerations of the happiness of past ages, must tend to the setting aside of methods of progress, the work of which, if slow, is yet solid, and to the hasty adoption of others of greater promise, but which resemble the potent medicines of a charlatan, and while quickly effecting a little good, sow the seeds of widespread and lasting decay. This impatient insincerity is an evil only less great than that moral torpor which can endure that we, with our modern resources and knowledge, should look on contentedly at the continued destruction of all that is worth having in multitudes of human lives, and solace ourselves with the reflection that anyhow the evils of our own age are less than those of the past. And now we must conclude this part of our study. we have reached very few practical conclusions, because it is generally necessary to look at the whole of the economic, to say nothing of the moral and other aspects of a practical problem, before attempting to deal with it all. And in real life, nearly every economic issue depends, more or less directly, on some complex actions and reactions of credit, of foreign trade, and of modern developments of combination and monopoly. But the ground which we have traversed in books 5 and 6 is, in some respects, the most difficult of the whole province of economics, and it commands and gives access to the remainder. End of chapter 8. End of Principles of Economics, Book 6, by Alfred Marshall.
The Alchemy of Finance, Reading the Mind of the Market, by George Soros. Your reader is Grover Gardner. Introduction. In a very real sense, this book is my life's work. It touches on many of my most abiding interests, and it brings together the two main strands in my intellectual development, one abstract and one practical. The abstract came first. Ever since I became conscious of my existence, I've had a passionate interest in understanding it, and I regarded my own understanding as the central problem that needed to be understood. To understand oneself is an impossible task. To achieve anything resembling knowledge, we must be able to draw a distinction between subject and object. Yet in this case, the two are the same. What one thinks is part of what one thinks about. Therefore, one's thinking lacks an independent point of reference by which it can be judged. It lacks objectivity. As an undergraduate, I studied economics, but I found economic theory highly unsatisfactory because it failed to come to grips with this problem. Indeed, it went through great contortions to avoid it. Economics seeks to be a science. Science is supposed to be objective, and it is difficult to be scientific when the subject matter, the participant in the economic process, lacks objectivity. I was greatly influenced at the time by Karl Popper's ideas on scientific method. I accepted most of his views, with one major exception. He argued in favor of what he called unity of method. That is, the methods and criteria that apply to the study of natural phenomena also apply to the study of social events. I felt that there was a fundamental difference between the two. The events studied by the social sciences have thinking participants. Natural phenomena do not. The participants' thinking creates problems that have no counterpart in natural science. The closest analogy is in quantum physics, where scientific observation gives rise to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. But in social events, it is the participants' thinking that is responsible for the element of uncertainty, not the outside observer. Natural science studies events that consist of a sequence of facts. When events have thinking participants, the subject matter is no longer confined to facts, but also includes the participants' perceptions. The chain of causation does not lead directly from fact to fact, but from fact to perception, and from perception to fact. This would not create any insuperable difficulties if there were some kind of correspondence or equivalence between facts and perceptions. Unfortunately, that is impossible because the participants' perceptions do not relate to facts, but to a situation that is contingent on their own perceptions and therefore cannot be treated as a fact. Economic theory tries to sidestep the issue by introducing the assumption of rational behavior. People are assumed to act by choosing the best of the available alternatives, but somehow the distinction between perceived alternatives and facts is assumed away. The result is a theoretical construction of great elegance that resembles natural science, but does not resemble reality. It relates to an ideal world in which participants act on the basis of perfect knowledge, and it produces a theoretical equilibrium in which the allocation of resources is at an optimum. It has little relevance to the real world in which people act on the basis of imperfect understanding, and equilibrium is beyond reach. The relationship between the participants' understanding and the situation in which they participate continued to preoccupy me long after I left college. My first priority was to try and make a living, but in my spare time I wrote a philosophical treatise on the subject with the catchy title, The Burden of Consciousness. Unfortunately, the title was the best part of it. By the time I finished, I disagreed with my own presentation. I spent 3 years revising it. One day I reread what I had written the day before, and I could not make head or tail of it. It made me realize that I had reached a dead end, and I decided to give it up. That was when the practical streak in me began to dominate my intellectual development. If I had to sum up my practical skills, I would use one word: survival. When I was an adolescent, the Second World War gave me a lesson that I have never forgotten. I was fortunate enough to have a father who was highly skilled in the art of survival, having lived through the Russian Revolution as an escaped prisoner of war. Under his tutelage, the Second World War served as an advanced course at a tender age. As the reader shall see, the investment vehicle I created a quarter of a century later drew heavily on skills I learned as an adolescent. After leaving college, I had a number of false starts and finally became an international arbitrage trader in stocks, first in London and then in New York. When the European Common Market was formed in 1957, American investors became interested in European shares. I became a security analyst advising American institutions on their European investments, and for a brief period I ruled as a one-eyed king among the blind. My glory came to an abrupt end when President Kennedy introduced a so-called interest equalization tax, which effectively stopped purchases of foreign securities. I decided to put my money-making activities on the back burner and spent 3 years, from 1963 to 1966, revising The Burden of Consciousness. When I finally decided to return to the land of the living, I started a model portfolio that became a hedge fund, a mutual fund that employs leverage and uses various techniques of hedging, in 1969. I have been in charge of that fund ever since, although I delegated much of the responsibility to others between September 1981 and September 1984. The fund has grown from about $4 million at inception to nearly $2 billion, and most of the growth has been internally generated. Original investors have seen the value of their shares multiply 300-fold. No investment fund has ever produced comparable results. In the first 10 years of my business career, I had not much use for anything I had learned in college, and there was an almost total separation between my practical activities and my theoretical interests. Selling and trading in securities was a game I played without putting my true self on the line. All this changed when I became a fund manager. I was putting my money where my mouth was, and I could not afford to dissociate myself from my investment decisions. I had to use all my intellectual resources, and I discovered, to my great surprise and gratification, that my abstract ideas came in very handy. It would be an exaggeration to say that they accounted for my success, but there can be no doubt that they gave me an edge. I developed my own peculiar approach to investing, which was at loggerheads with the prevailing wisdom. The generally accepted view is that markets are always right. That is, market prices tend to discount future developments accurately, even when it is unclear what those developments are. I start with the opposite point of view. I believe that market prices are always wrong, in the sense that they present a biased view of the future. But distortion works in both directions. Not only do market participants operate with a bias, but their bias can also influence the course of events. This may create the impression that markets anticipate future developments accurately, but in fact it is not present expectations that correspond to future events, but future events that are shaped by present expectations. The participants' perceptions are inherently flawed, and there is a two-way connection between flawed perceptions and the actual course of events, which results in a lack of correspondence between the two. I call this two-way connection reflexivity. In the course of my investment activities, I discovered that financial markets operate on a principle that is somehow akin to scientific method. Making an investment decision is like formulating a scientific hypothesis and submitting it to a practical test. The main difference is that the hypothesis that underlies an investment decision is intended to make money and not to establish a universally valid generalization. Both activities involve significant risk, and success brings a corresponding reward, monetary in one case and scientific in the other. Taking this view, it is possible to see financial markets as a laboratory for testing hypotheses, albeit not strictly scientific ones. The truth is, successful investing is a kind of alchemy. Most market participants do not view markets in this light. That means that they do not know what hypotheses are being tested. It also means that most of the hypotheses that are submitted to market testing are quite banal. Usually, they amount to nothing more than the assertion that a particular stock is going to outperform the market averages. I had a certain advantage over other investors because at least I had an idea about the way financial markets operate. I would be lying, however, if I claimed that I could always formulate worthwhile hypotheses on the basis of my theoretical framework. Sometimes there were no reflexive processes to be found. Sometimes I failed to find them. And what was the most painful of all, sometimes I got them wrong. One way or another, I often invested without a worthwhile hypothesis, and my activities were not very different from a random walk. But I was attuned to reflexive processes in financial markets, and my major successes came from exploiting the opportunities they presented. My approach to the market was not as abstract as it sounds. It took an intensely personal, emotional form. Testing was closely associated with pain and success with relief. When I asserted that markets are always biased, I was giving expression to a deeply felt attitude. I had a very low regard for the sagacity of professional investors, and the more influential their position, the less I considered them capable of making the right decisions. My partner and I took a malicious pleasure in making money by selling short stocks that were institutional favorites. But we differed in our attitudes to our own activities. He regarded only the other participants' views as flawed, while I thought that we had as good a chance of being wrong as anyone else. The assumption of inherently flawed perceptions suited my self-critical attitude. Operating a hedge fund utilized my training in survival to the fullest. Using leverage can produce superior results when the going is good, but it can wipe you out when events fail to conform to your expectations. One of the hardest things to judge is what level of risk is safe. There are no universally valid yardsticks. Each situation needs to be judged on its own merit. In the final analysis, you must rely on your instincts for survival. Thus, my engagement in running a hedge fund brought together both my abstract interests and my practical skills. I did not play the financial markets according to a particular set of rules. I was always more interested in understanding the changes that occur in the rules of the game. I started with hypotheses relating to individual companies. With the passage of time, my interests veered increasingly toward macroeconomic themes. This was due partly to the growth of the fund and partly to the growing instability of the macroeconomic environment. For instance, exchange rates were fixed until 1973. Subsequently, they became a fertile field for speculation. For the past 4 or 5 years, I have had a growing sense of impending financial disaster. I felt that a long-lasting expansionary cycle was becoming increasingly unsound and unsustainable. We were getting ready for a bust. That was one of the reasons I distanced myself from the active management of the fund in 1981 and reduced its overall level of exposure. My interest shifted from my own survival to the survival of the system. I made a study of the international debt problem and published some papers on the subject. I used the same theoretical framework as in my investment activities, and my analysis was not without merit. Unfortunately, the more complex the system, the greater the room for error. I made some mistakes in my analysis that detracted from the accuracy of my predictions. They also had a detrimental effect on my investment results until I revised my views in the course of writing this book. The more successful I had been in applying my ideas in financial markets, the keener I became to express them in theoretical form. I continued to cherish the fantasy that the concept of reflexivity constitutes a major contribution to our understanding of the world in which we live. I believed that the participant's bias is the key to an understanding of all historical processes that have thinking participants, just as genetic mutation is the key to biological evolution. But a satisfactory formulation of the theory of reflexivity continued to elude me. I always ran into trouble when I tried to define what I meant by the imperfect understanding of the participants. To speak accurately of a distortion, we must know what the situation would be if it were not distorted by the participants' perceptions. Unfortunately, that does not seem possible because the participants' thinking is an integral part of the situation they have to think about. It is not surprising that the concept of reflexivity should present extreme difficulties. If it were an easier concept to work with, economists and other social scientists would not have gone to such lengths to banish it from their subject matter. This book is a final attempt to explore the implications of reflexivity. I have tried to circumvent the difficulties I encountered in the past by approaching the subject from the opposite direction. Instead of getting bogged down in abstract theory, I am going to draw on my experimental, practical findings to the greatest possible extent. I cannot avoid an abstract discussion altogether, but I have confined it to a single chapter. In exploring the practical implications, I start with the simplest cases and gradually lead up to more complex ones. This approach happens to coincide with the historical order in which I encountered reflexive developments in practice. First the stock market, then the currency market, then the international debt problem, and finally what may be called the credit cycle. The stock market provides some pure examples of a boom and bust pattern. Freely floating currency rates allow me to explore well-formed wave patterns. The boom and bust in international bank lending is part of a more complex historical process of credit expansion and eventual credit contraction. It has given rise to the configuration that I have dubbed Reagan's Imperial Circle. The configuration prevailed from the international debt crisis of 1982 until the first half of 1985, but it was inherently unstable. How the instability will be resolved is one of the main questions considered in this book. The experimental approach has borne unexpected results. I made two major discoveries in the course of writing. One is a reflexive connection between credit and collateral. The other is a reflexive relationship between the regulators and the economy they regulate. It has long been assumed that monetary values are a passive reflection of the state of affairs in the real world. Classical economics focused on the real world and neglected the problems connected with money and credit. Even Keynes couched his general theory in real terms. Monetarists sought to stand the relationship on its head. They argue that it is possible to control inflation by controlling the growth of the money supply. In my opinion, all these views are based on a fundamental misconception. Money values do not simply mirror the state of affairs in the real world. Valuation is a positive act that makes an impact on the course of events. Monetary and real phenomena are connected in a reflexive fashion. That is, they influence each other mutually. The reflexive relationship manifests itself most clearly in the use and abuse of credit. Loans are based on the lender's estimation of the borrower's ability to...
Thank you, George. All right, so that, ladies and gentlemen, that was my special guest spirit. Spirit be gone. Now it's time for me to practice the banishing ritual to get rid of these spirits, pesky spirits. Send them back to the spirit realm. Spirits be gone. Okay. Till I call you forth again. In my next seance / YouTube videos / podcast / seance / black magic necromantic rituals. Be gone! Okay. You're supposed to do that part with passion, emotion. Okay. Anyway, so ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about public relations, an economic perspective. I just chose that title because I was trying to somehow weave the two. It's a mashup. Okay. All right. So anyway, ethics, part C. Ethics in journalism. The Society of Professional Journalists is quite explicit in the subject of ethics. Journalists, and I quote, journalists at all times will show respect for the dignity, privacy, rights, and well-being of people encountered in the course of gathering and presenting the news. The news media should not communicate unofficial charges affecting reputation or moral character without giving the accused a chance to reply. The news media must guard against invading a person's right to privacy. The media should not pander to morbid curiosity about details of vice and crime, and so on. Unfortunately, what is in the SPJ Code of Ethics often does not reflect what appears in print or on the air. More often than not, journalistic judgments run smack into ethical principles. Ethics in public relations. As noted in an earlier post, ethics is, or at least should be, the great differentiator between public relations and other professions. In light of numerous misconceptions about the practice of public relations, it is imperative that practitioners emulate the highest standards of personal and professional ethics. Within an organization, public relations practitioners must be the standard bearers of corporate ethical initiatives. By the same token, public relations consultants must always counsel their clients in an ethical direction toward accuracy and candor, and away from lying and hiding the truth. The public relations department should be the seat of corporate ethics. At least 4 ethical theories are relevant to the practice of public relations. Number 1. Okay, yeah, there's at least 4. There's many more, but I'm just... Anyway, but here's 4 important ones. You got number 1, the attorney advisory model. The attorney adversary model. Developed by Jay Barney and Ralph Black, compares the legal position to that of public relations, and that 1, both are advocates in an adversarial climate, and 2, both assume counterbalancing messages will be provided by adversaries. In this model, Barney and Black suggest practitioners have no obligation to consider the public interest or any other outside view beyond that of their client. You have that view. Number 2, you have this view, the two-way communication model, developed by Jim Grunig. Is based on collaboration, working jointly with different people and allowing for both listening and give and take. In this model, Grunig suggests that the practitioner balance his or her role as a client advocate with one as a social conscience for the larger public. 3, you got the enlightened self-interest model, developed by Sherry Baker. This is based on the principle that businesses do well by doing good. In this model, Baker suggests that companies gain a competitive advantage and are more respected in the marketplace if they behave ethically. All right, number 4, the responsible advocacy model, developed by Kathy Fitzpatrick and Candice Gauthier. It's based on the ideal of professional responsibility. It postulates that practitioners' first loyalty is to their clients, but they also have a responsibility to voice the opinions of organizational stakeholders. In this model, Fitzpatrick and Gautier suggest that the practitioner's greatest need for ethical guidance is in the reconciliation of being both a professional advocate and a social conscience. Last word on ethics. The scandals in government and business have placed a premium in every sector of society on acting ethically. As one CEO put it, there is no truer window into a corporation's soul than its approach to ethics. The same can be said for the practice of public relations. The success of public relations in the 21st century will depend largely on how the field responds to the issue of ethical conduct. Public relations professionals must have credibility in order to practice. They must be respected by the various publics with which they interact. To be credible and to achieve respect, public relations professionals must be ethical. It is that simple. Stated another way, for public relations practice in general, and individual public relations professionals in particular, credibility depends on how scrupulously they observe and apply the principles and practices of ethics in everything they do. Moving on. Enough on ethics, right? Stop beating me over the head with the ethics, man. Stop it. It's very important, ladies and gentlemen. Employee relations. Strong employee relations equals solid organizations. In the 21st century, employee relations matters a lot. The reason is obvious. When one considers the fortunes of employees in recent years and the growing importance of internal communications. First, the wave of downsizing and layoffs that dominated business and industry both in the United States and worldwide after the high-tech bubble burst in the early years of the 21st century has taken its toll on employee loyalty. Although employees once implicitly trusted their organizations and superiors, today they are more hardened to the realities of a job market dominated by technological change that reduces human labor. Today, when companies lay off workers, they are often rewarded by the stock market for becoming more productive and efficient. This phenomenon has caused employees to understand that in today's business climate, every employee is expendable, and there's no such thing as lifetime employment. Consequently, companies must work harder at honestly communicating with their workers. The widening gulf between the pay of senior officers and common workers is another reason organizations must be sensitive to employee communications. Okay, right here is a good place. We're going to take a break. Just a quick break. Shall return right after. I'll leave you in the very capable hands of monks in Tibet playing healing Tibetan bowl music. Just a quick break. Be right back. Oh, quick break. Be right back. All right. Thank you, Tibetan monks. Moving on. So, the move toward globalization, including the merger of geographically dispersed organizations, is another reason for increased focus on internal communications. Technology has hastened the integration of business and markets around the world. Customers on faraway continents are today but a mouse click away. Alliances, affiliations, and mergers among far-flung companies have proliferated. Organizations have become much more cognizant of the importance of communicating the opportunities and benefits that will enhance support and loyalty among worldwide staffs. Finally, research indicates that companies that communicate effectively with their workers financially outperform those that do not. One study found that companies with the most effective internal communications programs returned 57% more to their shareholders and companies with the least effective programs. This is from an article where CEO worker pay ratio shoots up to 4. Okay, anyway, United for a Fair Economy news release, October 30th, 2005. So there you go. These phenomena suggest that the value of intellectual capital has increased in importance. In the new information economy, business managers have realized that their most important assets are their employees. Employee communications, then, has become a key way to nurture and sustain that intellectual capital. This was not always the case. For years, employee communications was considered less important than the more glamorous and presumably more critical functions of media, government, and investor relations. Today, with fewer employees expected to do more work, staff members are calling for empowerment, for more of a voice in decision making. Just about every researcher who keeps tabs on employee opinion finds evidence of a trust gap that exists between management and workers. To narrow that gap demands that more effective employee communications play a pivotal role. Dealing with the employee public. Just as there is no such thing as the general public, there is also no single employee public. The employee public is made up of numerous subgroups: senior managers, first line supervisors, staff and line employees, union laborers, per diem employees, contract workers, and others. Each group has different interests and concerns. Smart organizations will try to differentiate messages and communications to reach the segment. Indeed, in a general sense, today the staff is younger, increasingly female, more ambitious and career-oriented, less complacent, and less loyal to the company than in the past. Today's more hard-nosed employee demands candor in communications. Internal communications, like external messages, must be targeted to reach specific subgroups of the employee public. Grounding and effective employee communications requires management to ask 3 hard questions about the way it conveys knowledge to the staff. Is management able to communicate effectively with employees? Is communication trusted? And does it relay appropriate information to employees? Has management communicated its commitment to its employees and to fostering a rewarding work environment? In many instances, the biggest problem is that employees don't know where they stand in the eyes of management. In addition, they often do not understand how compensation programs work or what they need to do to move ahead. This lack of understanding leads to discontent, frustration, miscommunication, problems, and eventually to the feeling that the grass is greener elsewhere. Clearly, organizing effective, believable, and persuasive internal communications in the midst of organizational change is a core, critical public relations responsibility in the 21st century. Communicating effectively in a sea of doubt. An organization truly concerned about getting through to its employees in an era of downsizing, displacement, and dubious communication must reinforce 5 specific principles. 1, respect. Employees must be respected for their worth as individuals and their value as workers. They must be treated with respect and not as interchangeable commodities. Honest feedback. By talking to workers about their strengths and weaknesses, employees help employees know where they stand. By talking to workers about their strengths and weaknesses, employers help employees know where they stand. Some managers incorrectly assume that avoiding negative feedback will be helpful. Wrong. Employees need to know where they stand at any given time. Candid communications will help them in this pursuit. Recognition. Employees feel successful when management recognizes their contributions. It is the duty of the public relations professional to suggest mechanisms by which deserving employees will be honored. A voice. In the era of talk radio and television talk shows and blogs, almost everyone wants their ideas to be heard and to have a voice in decision making. This growing activist communications phenomenon must be considered by public relations professionals seeking to win internal goodwill for management. Encouragement. Study after study reveals that money and benefits motivate employees up to a point, but that something else is generally necessary. That something else is encouragement. Workers need to be encouraged. Communications programs that provide encouragement generally produce results. What distinguishes the communication effort at a better place to work? A quote, better place to work, unquote. What distinguishes the communication effort at, quote, a better place to work, unquote, end quote. According to Milton Moskowitz, co-author of the 100 Best Companies to Work For in America, 6 criteria in particular have stood the test of time. 1, willingness to express dissent. Employees, according to Moskowitz, want to be able to feed back to management their opinions and even dissent. They want access to management. They want critical letters to appear in internal publications. They want management to pay attention. 2, visibility and proximity of upper management. Enlightened companies try to level rank distinctions, eliminating such status reminders as executive cafeterias and executive gymnasiums. They act against hierarchical separation, says Moskowitz. He adds that smart CEOs practice MBWA, management by walking around. 3, priority of internal to external communication. The worst thing to happen to any organization is for employees to learn critical information about the company on the 10 o'clock news. Smart organizations always release pertinent information to employees first and consider internal communication primary. 4, attention to clarity. How many employees regularly read benefits booklets? The answer should be many because of the importance of benefit programs to the entire staff. But most employees never do so. Good companies write such booklets with clarity to be readable for a general audience rather than for human resources specialists. 5, friendly tone. According to Moskowitz, the best companies give a sense of family in all that they communicate. One high-tech company makes everyone wear a name tag with the first name in big black letters. These little things are most important, declares Moskowitz. 6, sense of humor. People are worried principally about keeping their jobs. Corporate life for many is grim. Moskowitz says this is disastrous. It puts people in straitjackets so they can't wait to get out at the end of the day. So, what internal communications comes down to, just like external communications, is, in a word, credibility. The task for management is to convince employees that it not only desires to communicate with them, but also wishes to do so in a truthful, frank, and direct manner. That is the overriding challenge that confronts today's internal communicator. All right, so this is the part of the show where I give props where props are due, and I'm actually taking a lot of this from an analysis I did of a book I read, and I put it all in my blog. So yeah, it looks like I am teleprompter reading. I am teleprompter reading, but I wrote most of the stuff. But I'm borrowing heavily from The Practice of Public Relations, 10th edition, 2007, Fraser P. Seidel. So it's a got to give props where props are due. All right, moving on. Employee relations. Part B. Credibility. The key. The employee public is a savvy one. Employees cannot be conned because they live with the organization every day. They generally know what is going on and whether management is being honest with them. That is why management must be truthful. Employees want managers to level with them. They want facts, not wishful thinking. The days when management could say, "Trust us, this is for your own good," are over. Employees like hearing the truth, especially in person. Indeed, survey after survey suggests that face-to-face communications, preferably between a supervisor and subordinate, is the hands-down most effective method of employee communication. Employees also want to know candidly how they're doing. Research indicates that trust in organizations would increase if management, 1, communicated earlier and more frequently, 2, demonstrated trust in employees by sharing bad news as well as good, and 3, involved employees in the process by asking for their ideas and opinions. Effective employee communication means that an organization's leaders have taken the time to clearly and succinctly articulate the vision of the business, show how employees can contribute to it, and demonstrate how it can be lived in the daily jobs. Today, smart companies realize that well-informed employees are the organization's best goodwill ambassadors. Managements have become more candid in their communications with the staff. Gone are the days when all of the news coming from management is all good. In today's environment, being candid means treating people with dignity, addressing their concerns, and giving them the opportunity to understand the realities of the marketplace. Organizations have opted out of print publications for their employees due to the tremendous growth of email and intranet. These instant direct devices provide greater opportunity today to increase the frequency and candor of communications. A major part of the challenge that confronts internal communications is to reflect credibility and communicating that underscores the level of respect with which employees should be held by management. Most employees desperately want to be treated as important parts of an organization. They should not be taken for granted, nor should they be shielded from the truth. Thus, the most important ingredient of internal communications programs must be credibility. SHOC, shock the troops. Enhancing credibility, being candid, and winning trust must be the primary employee communications objectives in the 21st century. Earning employee trust may result in more committed and productive employees, but scraping away the scar tissue of distrust that exists in many organizations requires a strategic approach. The question is, how does management build trust when employee morale is so brittle? Part of the answer lies in an approach to management communication built around the acronym SHOC, or SHOC. That is, management should consider a four-step communications approach built on communications that are strategic, honest, open, and consistent to begin to rebuild employee trust. First, all communications must be strategic. What strategic communication essentially boils down to is this. Most employees want you to answer only two basic questions for them. Where is this organization going? And B, what is my role in helping us get there? Okay, so second, all communications must be honest. The sad fact is that while most executives pay lip service to candor and honesty, in the end, too many dissemble, obfuscate, and pull their punches. They seem to fear, as Jack Nicholson raged in A Few Good Men, that the staff can't handle the truth. Such trepidation is foolish. For one thing, the staff already may discount anything management tells them. Or another, you cannot hope to build credibility through lying. Third, all communications must be open. This is another way of saying that there must be feedback. The best communications are two-way communications. That means that no matter how large the organization, employee views must be solicited, listened to, and most important, acted upon. That latter aspect is most important. Often managers stage elaborate forums and feedback sessions, listen to employee gripes and suggestions, and yet do nothing. The key must be action. Fourth, all communications must be consistent. Once you begin to communicate, you must keep it up. Maintain a regular, on-time, and predictable program of internal newsletters, employee forums, leadership meetings, and reward celebrations. On again, off again communications are programs that start with bold promises only to peter out, question management's commitment to keeping the staff informed. Generally, employee information, education, and morale-boosting programs start with great pomp and promise. The CEO blusters his way through a rousing speech. Literature pours out from on high. Task forces plunge into quick fix assignments, and then over time, nada. Wrong. Communications, if they are to work, must be steady, sometimes painfully consistent. And no, that is not a call to violence, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Just got to make that clear. Oh, the heck? Okay. It's not dead air. It's a Hitlerian dramatic pause. The silence is bringing us all together. It's building false intimacy. Okay. Let's see. It's a little tip for you young up-and-comers out there. Employee relations, part C. Employee communications tactics. Yeah, feel free to use that Hitlerian dramatic pause anytime you want. Okay, once objectives are set, a variety of techniques can be adopted to reach the staff. The initial tool, again, is research. Before any communications program can be implemented, communicators must have a good sense of staff attitudes. Internal communications audits, both a strategy and a tactic. The internal communications audit is the most beneficial form of research on which to lay the groundwork for effective employee communications. Ideally, this starts with old-fashioned, personal, in-depth interviews with management and communicators. It is important to find out from top management what it wants from the communications team. It is also important to find out what communicators think management wants. Often, the discontinuities are startling. The 3 critical audit questions to probe are: 1. How do internal communications support the mission of the organization? 2. Do internal communications have management support? And 3. How responsive to employee needs and concerns are internal communications? Audits help determine staff attitudes about their jobs, the organization, and its mission, coupled with an analysis of the existing communications techniques. The findings of such audits are often revealing, always informative, and never easily ignored. Internal audits can be conducted by organizational personnel or consultants. Sometimes consultants provide a more objective analysis of the situation and what is required to improve it. Once internal communications research is completed, the public relations practitioner has a clear idea of the kinds of communications vehicles that make sense for the organization. Online communications. The age of online communications has ushered in a whole new set of employee communications. Vehicles from email to voicemail to tailored organizational intranets to individual blogs. All right, looks like we got a call here on the wildcard line. No. Yeah, hey caller, you're on the air.
Hey, what's up, Sealand? This is Oaktown. I haven't called in a while.
All right, Infamous Oaktown. What's up, buddy?
Nothing much. I just tuned in. Well, what are you talking about? Business related, right? Or
I'm talking about the wonderful world of public relations.
okay, nice. Public relations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been really. I kind of took a hiatus, or whatever you want to call it, from listening to not just your shows, but a lot of shows. But I started getting back into it. I've noticed. I think that's all you've been talking about, right? Mainly like business stuff.
Yeah, pretty much just like hard-nosed business type stuff. Every now and then I get a caller, and when I do, we go back. We start talking about the conspiracy theory shit, but that's all anybody wants to ever really talk about. But I don't know. It's not like I don't know. I just got really tired of it. I got bored of it, man, and I'm all trying to think of solutions.
Yeah.
How are we gonna, if you really want to, I mean, for those of you who might be listening, you don't know what the hell we're talking about. The show goes back to like 2010, and when it started, we talked a lot about Bigfoot, subterranean aliens, and bases, and all kinds of crazy shit. And but conspiracy theory stuff, which a lot, whatever. It's debatable about how much of it is true. But anyway, I was trying to be an investigative journalist at the time, I guess, as much as I could at that point in time. But eventually, I don't know. I kind of just felt like I got bored of it, man. It's not like I'm afraid or that the man, because I'm not really that powerful at all, but I just got tired. I don't know. Just got bored with it.
Yeah, but I was gonna ask you, man. Your shows, they're not really like scheduled, right? You'll maybe do one show a week, or then next week you'll do 5. Because I've been like looking at your blog, and I'm like, oh, when's he gonna be on there? So I can call in, and I just like, like, holy shit, real quick, yeah.
No, man, that is, yeah, I haven't, no, I don't schedule it just because the way my schedule is now. I don't know, I'm a little bit busier. I got like a couple different crazy, weird projects going on. And also, I really enjoy the blog and the writing on the blog. And so a lot of my audience likes the blog too. So, it's just yeah, and it takes I think the blog is actually more popular than the podcast and the YouTube channel, but still I still like doing it though. Just these are pretty esoteric topics. I mean, as far as economics and finance and business and shit, people. So I don't expect to have a huge audience. I do it more for my own education, keep my mind sharp. I'm getting old, bro.
No, I was just gonna chime in. I guess I started listening to this radio. It's called what the hell? I don't know if you heard of it. Freedom Slips Radio or Revolution Radio.
Freedomizer Radio. Yeah, I've heard of it.
Freedom Slips or Revolution Radio.
No, what is this? Freedom. I heard of. Okay, what is it?
Freedom Slips. Anyway, I don't know. It's not. I don't think it's that. I mean, it's an okay radio station to listen to. I don't think it's like super cool, but something having in the background to listen to. I don't know. Some of the hosts kind of piss me off because they throw in the Bible too much. Like they're way into conspiracy shit, but then they have the Bible as reference. Like I don't know. I mean, whatever. People want to believe that, it's fine, but I kind of like, I don't know.
What is it? Freedom what?
Freedom Slips.
Freedom Slips. Okay. Slips.
Or just put on Google Revolution Radio.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Listening to their roundtables, they usually start late, so like 11 o'clock Pacific. So it'd probably be like 1 o'clock your time in the morning.
Oh, okay.
Maybe too late. But I mean, it's interesting just at that time.
So yeah, well, it's cool. I kind of from time to time, I try to find if there's still something in there and whatever the Patriot Radio community or whatever you want to call it. But alternative research community.
I listened to a bunch of other shit like the last month and a half because I got back into it, but I don't know. It's just my opinion. All radio sucks.
Yeah. I tell you what. Yeah, I just I haven't been able to find. Okay, freedomslips.com. Well, yeah, I'm gonna check them out, man. I'm at the site, but so.
They could have a chat room, but it's not like Oracle where each host has a chat room.
Yeah.
It just has like one main chat room for everyone. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you don't like it, I wouldn't be surprised because it does kind of suck. But I don't know. Just maybe check it out if you want. And then.
No, I'm just glad to see. I kind of thought all of that shit just got completely killed, or something. I don't know. I know it's. I don't know. I think about that stuff all the time. I don't know. It seemed like we were just like a bunch of. It seemed like there's only like maybe 25 people. Well, I guess towards the end, there were like 25 people who were into it, but we were like, we're like the biggest nerds, dorks, whatever of all time. Just really radio, internet radio about conspiracy theories, but I don't know. I had a really good time doing it, but yeah, I was partying way too much, man. And by the time I dried out and got, sobered up and shit a little bit, everything had died down. And I was like, well, shit. So I just started doing this stuff, talking about the business administration economics, finance, and all that stuff. So I figured this is probably a little bit more solution oriented anyway than just constantly bitching at this guy or that guy. So.
Hey, but I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty entertaining. I don't know what it is about those days. It was just like entertaining. It was cool.
Oh yeah.
Even cool. I don't know, man. It didn't seem like kind of like high school to you, like junior high. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. Yeah, I mean, I think about it a lot. Like, there was something really like magical about it in a way. We're just like a bunch of misfit dorks. It all kind of met up in cyberspace. Yeah, and it was just like so obscure. Like I said, there's only I got a message from Trite Static. I think she's been watching on YouTube because I'm doing like a sort of a simulcast type thing now.
Oh yeah, I did see her post something on the Real Issues chat room saying that she doesn't really keep up with any stuff anymore. I think she said she talked to Ursta and Rob Chowder. Remember that guy from Oracle?
Yeah. He's on my Facebook. I don't really do Facebook at all anymore, except like I promote I use it for promotion, but I just can't. Oh, it's just so horrible. I can't even bear to look at it. But but there's a few people on there. Rob Revere and Rob Chowder. He's on there. He gave me shit for jumping the shark a long time ago, having the balls to actually be doing a show again. But like I said, man, I'm not really doing it. I'm doing it mostly for myself, just because I have an interest in this stuff, and I went to school for it, and I don't know. I just want to keep my communication skills somewhat sharp.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna ask you. Do you still? So you know what happened to what's the name, Honey Radiance or KDX Radio?
No, I have no idea. I was talking to Herbster earlier in the year via Facebook, and I don't know. At that time, man, I was really going through like a big bout of depression, big time. Like when you first got a hold of me, I was just looking at that. I guess in this November or December, it'll be like a year that I started doing these radio shows again.
Crazy.
But I was really bummed out. I guess I was going into writer mode or something. And just I don't know. I was, like I said, my health was really bad, and so I was just straightening, getting cleaned up and stuff. But I was just really depressed. I didn't want to talk to him, and so he kept sending me message after message on Facebook, and I was just ignoring. And a lot of people were, and I was just ignoring them because I was just. I don't know. I just felt completely like I just depressed, man. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And so eventually I was like, I started coming out of it a little bit. And early spring or something like that. And I shot him a message back, and he was like, yeah, here's Haggard Hound's number. He was like, give him a call, please. And so I finally I pulled my head out of my ass, and I called Haggard Hound. And then he never called me back. And then Herb stuff completely vanished from Facebook. I guess he was enjoying just needling me more than he didn't actually want me to respond or something. But I don't know. But I think that's the way it got with a lot of people. Like you were saying, it's kind of a junior high thing, high school thing. People just kind of grew up, moved on a little bit.
Yeah, people came and went. It's funny because I was kind of like the same way as you were. People would send messages and I wouldn't respond until like months later. And I'm like, what the fuck, where were you, dude? But yeah, I don't know, man. Like, it's just crazy thinking back. Honey Radiant.
Well, it is I was thinking the same thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, because I was listening to some of the archives. I still have some. I found them on my hard drive, and I was like, what the fuck? It did seem... they would talk about interesting conspiracy shit, but then I don't know what the fuck was it about it. Like, I would find it more interesting when they would, like, fight and have drama and shit like that,
Yeah, there was a lot of infighting going on. I remember that. I guess that's probably why it didn't. That's probably why it just didn't last. Everybody was getting all fragmented and fighting. It was the same. It was very punk rock, man, in a way, and it's kind of the same thing like happened with the punk rock scene. It's just people grew up a little bit, realized, man, I gotta get a fucking job. These guys are a bunch of fucking losers. It's like whatever, So I don't know. I mean, that's not how I was going. Well, in a way, it was what I was going through. I've kind of just felt like total loser, and I was just like, man, I don't have time for this fucking bullshit. But that was all kind of really intimately intertwined with my partying and shit like that I was doing, was my self-destructive shit I was doing. So I guess I fell into the creative person trap or something. But I don't know. I grew out of it. But I'm 50 fucking years old, so my body couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah, it's funny because I was during that time, 2012. I think that was like when we were in the thick of it, right? 2012.
Yeah.
Early 2013. That's when I was smoking a lot of weed too, and then ever since that shit went down, I kind of stopped smoking weed too. So yeah, I can definitely relate to what you said. And I'm 27 right now, so yeah, back then I was like maybe 20, 22.
Yeah.
I fucking remember. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
it's part of the human condition, I guess. We can't help it. I mean, fuck it.
Yeah, his body just can't handle it. I mean, I did. I pretty much quit everything except the weed up till about 6 or 7 months ago. About 7 months ago, back in February, and I got pneumonia and ended up in the hospital again. I quit everything. My health was was way better because I kept having kidney fucking problems because I was drinking too much alcohol, and it was just fucking with me bad. And so I quit all that shit, quit all the hard drugs and all that shit, but I still kept smoking weed. And then I got pneumonia and ended up in the hospital, like I said, February or something. And I was like, fuck this shit. It's not, I wasn't enjoying it that much anymore. Now I take CBD oil and it's just as good. I mean, as far as treating like the using it for medicinal purposes, like I get muscle spasms and shit because of my disability. But the CBD oil works pretty good with that kind of shit. A lot of people, it doesn't do anything for them, but if you have like neurological damage, like epilepsy, stuff like that, muscle spasms, shit like that, it works pretty good for that, in my experience. I mean, I don't have epilepsy, but I know someone who does, and she swears by it.
Yeah, I have heard that about CBD. Like, it'll work for some people, and then for other people, I guess it won't. I don't know. Like, we're all different, right? What the fuck else? Colloidal silver, right? Oregano oil. I forgot. There's like all kinds of supplements in the spiritual world that I never used them myself, but like I said, I've heard mixed reviews.
I was doing a colloidal silver. It didn't really do a whole lot for me. Like I said, I was taking it because I kept having problems with the kidney infections and shit like that, and so I just started and I don't know, I didn't really notice the difference, so I just quit taking it. But some people swear by it. Everybody's different. I tried it though, but.
Didn't you say you bought AJ's products and you say they actually did work? AJ Jones?
Yeah, I tell you what. I mean, it depends. He does have really good supplements. The iodine is just awesome. I mean, that's not a scam at all. I don't think he's not. He's really good with his supplements. I mean, you can love him or hate him, but his supplements are pretty good. I wonder if I'm going to get kicked off YouTube now. But let's see. Nope, I'm still on there. Okay, but yeah, no, it's pretty. No, they're pretty strict about that now. They don't like AJ whatsoever. But I think it's. I mean, if you even mention it, or I think it's. I don't know if it's a person that does it or if it's the AI program picking up on keywords or what, but you will get bounced if you say certain
Yeah, it's probably a
words or
combination of both. Yeah.
yeah. So I was bounced a couple times under sort of fishy circumstances, but what are you gonna do? It's a brave new world, right? So I wasn't too bummed out about it because I mean I was still on Blog Talk. I think there's a little bit of censorship that goes on over at Blog Talk, but not it's not nearly as bad. And I think they really are more concerned about like quality, like if you get on there and you just play a recording on your show of some other guy for 2 hours, they'll just be like, what the fuck is this? And they won't let you publish your, but you got to get in there. Like if you want to use other people's stuff, you got to sort of get in there and mix it up and throw in your own analysis, sort of make it your own. Then they'll kind of let you get away with that. And once again, that could be just an AI program as well. So making these.
Yeah, I know it's definitely like an underground, like, I remember back in the day, back like in high school, 2006, 2007, like, I had this hacker, well, I don't want to say hacker, but a friend that really knew a lot about internet, and yeah, he would show me like all kinds of different internet forums. This was like back in the day, like, with MySpace. Remember MySpace when that shit was popular shit?
Yep.
It was like, I think, I can't even remember the damn names, but there was like underground websites that, like, you could post anything. It's kind of like dark web in a way, because, nobody really, like, that, I don't know, but I would think that you could post anything you want on dark web, and people that are in the know will know where to look for it, right? Like, I'm not talking illegal shit, just like, conspiracy shit, like AJ or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure they're, like 4chan, I don't know if you're on 4chan, Reddit.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about it. And I do a lot of promotional stuff and on MeWe. I don't know if you heard of that.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
MeWe, yeah, it's spelled MEWE, but it's almost it's like a clone of Facebook. It's almost the exact same program, but it's it's like I guess a black dark web type. But I mean, I don't know if it's dark web or not, but that's where all the, I guess, whatever sort of right leaning people go.
Like not as strict as 90 seconds. Right then and there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, something like that.
All right. Well, hey, man, I'm gonna let you go. I gotta get off the air. I gotta run here. So, figuratively speaking.
Yeah. One last question. So you just do improv shows, right? Like
Yeah, I'm just doing improv right now.
All right then. Yeah, I'll try to catch you. All right, man. Take it easy. Have a good one.
All right. Talk to you later. Thanks for calling in. Bye. All right. Infamous Oaktown calling in. Goodbye.